I am Audrey Vance. I just buried my grandmother, Eleanor Hughes. She was 78 years old, and we said our final goodbyes at a bleak, rain-soaked cemetery just outside of Boston. As the last of the mourners started to filter away from the graveside, her estate lawyer, Arthur Sterling, pulled me into the shadows. He didn't speak right away. He just leaned in incredibly close, his breath cold against the autumn wind.
"Your grandmother didn't die naturally, Audrey," he whispered, his eyes darting toward the black town cars. "If you want the absolute truth about what happened, come to my downtown office after everyone else leaves. But whatever you do, do not say a single word to your father or your stepmother. You could be in grave danger." He didn't wait for my response. He just turned his collar up and vanished into the thick gray fog.
I was left standing alone, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had no idea what to think, but the raw terror in his voice made me believe him instantly. Have you ever felt that terrifying, gut-wrenching moment when you realize the people living under your own roof might be hiding a deadly secret? Welcome back to Revenge Stories by Olivia. Drop a comment below and tell me exactly where you're watching from.
If you have ever had that dark, sinking feeling about your own family, hit the like button and subscribe right now. You absolutely will not want to miss a single second of what happens next. After the graveside service finally concluded, I purposely lingered near the row of parked cars. I pretended to fix my heavy wool coat, but I was actually watching my father, Richard, and his new wife, Sylvia, standing by the fresh dirt.
I couldn't hear every single word, but their sharp voices carried just enough on the damp Massachusetts air. Sylvia hissed something low and deeply urgent about striking while the iron was hot. My father muttered back, "The trust documents have to be fully executed before anyone starts asking questions about the autopsy." Those chilling words hit me like a solid wall of ice. They quickly turned away when they caught me looking. That tiny fragment of their conversation stuck inside my head like a poisoned needle. It felt entirely wrong, like a secret transaction that was never meant for my ears. I suddenly remembered the bizarre little things Grandma Eleanor had done during her last few agonizing months. She started keeping her financial ledgers securely locked in a heavy steel safe. She even installed a deadbolt on the inside of her master bedroom door. She told me it was just a precaution, but she absolutely refused to explain what she was so terribly afraid of. I had foolishly brushed it off as the mounting paranoia of an aging woman, but standing there in the freezing rain, those memories suddenly felt unspeakably heavy. When we finally returned to our massive, suffocating estate in the upscale Boston suburbs, my father immediately called me into the dimly lit study room. The massive house still smelled faintly of the expensive catered food the neighbors had sent over. He placed a thick, intimidating stack of legal documents onto the mahogany coffee table and sat down heavily across from me. "These are just some standard healthcare and financial conservatorship papers," he stated smoothly. "It is simply so we can step in and easily manage the estate if you ever need our help. Eleanor wanted this." Sylvia stepped gracefully out of the shadows, her arms elegantly folded, her signature icy smile plastered on her flawless face. Sylvia stepped gracefully out of the shadows, her arms elegantly folded, her signature icy smile plastered on her flawless face. "We just want to make absolutely sure you are fully protected, Audrey darling. Just sign right where the yellow tabs are. It is purely administrative." I slowly picked up the heavy top page. The language was incredibly dense, packed tight with suffocating legal terms, designed to confuse an average person. Buried in the text was a terrifying clause regarding substitute decision-making if I was ever deemed mentally unfit to manage my own affairs. It felt incredibly slippery, like a steel trap waiting to snap shut around my ankles. I asked him what exactly this legally covered. My dad waved his hand dismissively. "It is just routine boilerplate stuff, honey. You don't need to read every single line. We are family. You can trust us." I felt Sylvia's piercing gaze burning into the side of my head the entire time. Her eyes were not warm or comforting in the slightest. They were intensely watchful, precisely calculating exactly how much I suspected. I gently set the heavy stack of papers back down, and rubbed my exhausted eyes. "I am completely drained from the funeral," I lied smoothly. "Can we please handle this tomorrow morning? I really just need to lie down." Richard frowned deeply, but Sylvia's perfect smile merely tightened into a thin, dangerous line. "Of course, sweetheart. Take all the time you need," she purred softly. As I walked past her to leave the study, she gently patted my shoulder, and her manicured fingers felt like solid blocks of ice. I practically sprinted up the grand staircase and rushed straight into the vintage master bedroom that Grandma Eleanor used to occupy. I sat heavily on the edge of her massive canopy bed, my mind racing uncontrollably. Those whispered words at the rainy cemetery echoed loudly in my ears. It did not sound like the heavy grief of a loving family. It sounded exactly like a cold, calculated business transaction. I thought about Grandma's terrifying final weeks. She had abruptly stopped drinking her favorite evening hot cocoa, claiming it tasted incredibly bitter and metallic. During my very last visit, she grabbed my arm so tight it bruised. "If anything sudden happens to me, Audrey, promise me you will run. Do not let them trap you." She never explicitly said who they were, but sitting in her empty room, the horrifying truth suddenly hit me. I quickly locked the heavy wooden door shut. Sleep was completely impossible. I knew signing those legal documents would literally sign away my freedom and my life. At exactly midnight, I slipped silently out of the massive estate, making sure not to trigger the security alarms. I grabbed my car keys and drove aggressively through the dark, winding suburban streets. The drive to Arthur Sterling's downtown law office only took 20 terrifying minutes through the pouring rain. The towering glass building was completely dark when I arrived, except for a single eerie lamp glowing in the lobby window. I parked my car in the shadows and sprinted to the entrance. The heavy door clicked open before I even had the chance to knock. Arthur led me silently down the long, empty hallway, straight to his private office. A rugged, heavily scarred man was already sitting inside, waiting patiently in the leather chair. Arthur firmly locked the heavy door behind us. "Audrey, this is Vance," he announced in a grim, shaking voice. "He is a highly specialized private investigator. Your grandmother secretly hired him 3 months ago." Vance didn't bother to smile. He just stared at me with exhausted eyes. Eleanor came to me because she was terrified. She noticed her artisan cocoa tasted toxic. She believed someone was slowly trying to assassinate her. He opened a thick manila folder and slowly slid a confidential laboratory report across the glass desk. It was a chemical analysis from a private offshore testing facility. My eyes immediately locked onto a bright yellow highlighted section. Unidentified synthetic substance detected. Highly toxic. Causes severe cardiac distress. My stomach completely dropped into my shoes. It wasn't a definitive legal conclusion, but it was enough. "This doesn't definitively prove anything yet," I stammered, my hands trembling violently as I held the crisp paper. "It could just be a terrible mistake." Vance leaned incredibly close. "Your grandmother firmly believed it was a targeted hit, Audrey. She specifically instructed me that if she died suddenly, I had to find you immediately. She said you were the absolute only person in that entire house she could trust with her life." I shook my head wildly, hot tears finally spilling down my frozen cheeks. My father truly loved her. He wouldn't do this. He simply couldn't. Arthur placed a comforting hand on my shaking shoulder. "She never accused Richard directly. She just desperately wanted to be absolutely sure before she involved the local authorities. She didn't want a massive federal investigation destroying your family unless it was completely necessary." I felt the cold room get infinitely smaller. My racing mind instantly flashed back to the rainy cemetery, to those sinister, half-heard whispers from Richard and Sylvia. I thought about Grandma Eleanor's pale, exhausted face during her final weeks, how she bravely tried to smile through the agonizing pain when I visited. She had hugged me so incredibly tight, exactly like she knew she was saying her final, permanent goodbye. Vance slowly closed the thick manila folder. We do not have definitive legal proof yet, Audrey, but she desperately wanted you to know the absolute truth. If you decide to dig deeper into this nightmare, I will gladly help you. If not, you need to walk away right now. I did not answer him right away. A tiny, terrified part of me just wanted to run back to my warm bed and pretend none of this horrific nightmare was real. But another, much stronger part of my soul, the part that vividly remembered Grandma's quiet, terrifying warnings, knew I absolutely could not ignore this. I looked directly into Vance's intensely exhausted eyes. What exactly do we do next? He did not answer me immediately. He just stared at me, analyzing my face, carefully waiting to see exactly how far into the dangerous darkness I was genuinely willing to go for justice. I sat perfectly still in the quiet, shadowy office, the single glowing desk lamp casting long, distorted shadows across the glass table. Vance waited patiently, never pushing me. Arthur stood silently by the tall window, his arms tightly folded, watching the stormy downtown street outside. The freezing rain had started up again, aggressively tapping against the thick glass like a warning. I finally found my voice and spoke up. "Show me the physical sample she sent you," I demanded firmly. Vance reached deep into his tactical duffel bag and pulled out a small, heavily sealed plastic bag. Inside was a tiny medical vial containing a few dark cocoa powder remnants and a strange chalky white residue. "She secretly collected this from her very last batch," he explained in a gravely whisper. "The lab flagged the lethal anomaly immediately upon testing."
I gently took the evidence bag, slowly turning it over and over in my trembling hands. The powder looked completely ordinary, but knowing exactly where it came from made my skin crawl with pure disgust. "She truly believed this was happening to her," I whispered. "She absolutely did," Vance confirmed. "She meticulously wrote it all down in a hidden journal. Dates, times, and exactly how sick she felt after drinking every cup."
Arthur cleared his dry throat loudly. "Eleanor left highly specific instructions just for you, Audrey. If you truly want them, they are locked inside my wall safe. But once you take them, there is absolutely no turning back from this war." I stared at the grim lab report. I thought about my father, Richard, how he used to carry Grandma's heavy groceries, how he used to laugh so loudly at her jokes. Could he be this evil? The horrific idea made me physically nauseous. But then, Sylvia's flawless, frozen face aggressively flashed in my mind, her deeply watchful, calculating eyes, that utterly fake, two-faced smile, and those chilling words at the rainy cemetery. They were not speaking about profound grief. They were strictly speaking about timing and money. I took a massive deep breath to steady my violently shaking hands. "I want to see it." Arthur nodded grimly and walked over to the heavy steel safe, hidden in the dark corner. He carefully spun the brass dial and pulled out a small sealed envelope. My name was beautifully written across the front in Grandma's unmistakable, elegant handwriting. Inside was a single piece of heavy stationery and a tiny black flash drive. The handwritten note read, "Audrey, if you are reading this right now, I am already gone." The letter continued, "Trust Vance completely. He knows the absolute truth. The flash drive contains my secret audio recordings and medical notes. Do not let Richard and Sylvia take everything away from you. Protect your younger brother, Julian. He does not know anything about their sinister plans. I love you forever, Grandma." I held the fragile envelope incredibly tight. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely breathe. Vance watched me with a heavy gaze. "Are you truly ready for this dangerous fight?" I was absolutely terrified, but I nodded my head anyway. He thoroughly explained the horrifying financial motive he had recently uncovered. My father, Richard, had secretly made several catastrophic real estate investments. He was drowning in massive corporate debt. Sylvia, driven by pure, unadulterated greed, had aggressively pushed him into it. The sprawling Boston estate was worth tens of millions,
and Grandma's massive life insurance policy named Richard as the primary beneficiary, with me and Julian next in line. If they successfully eliminate Eleanor and then legally lock you away in a mental facility, Vance warned darkly, they get absolute control over every single penny, and Julian is completely oblivious at college. They will easily manipulate him next.
I will never let that happen, I vowed, my voice dripping with pure venom. Not to Julian, and absolutely not to Grandma's incredible legacy. Vance leaned intensely forward. Then we desperately need a flawless plan. A journal and a partial lab report will not hold up in federal court. We urgently need to catch Sylvia in the physical act of poisoning the drinks, or we need to secure an irrefutable recorded confession. If they suspect for a single second that you are onto them, they will immediately accelerate their twisted timeline, Vance warned me. You must go back into that massive house, act perfectly normal, and pretend you are still deeply grieving and unconditionally trusting them. He pulled out a tiny velvet-lined box containing 3 state-of-the-art microscopic surveillance cameras. They were no bigger than small shirt buttons.
You need to secretly install these exact cameras directly inside the main kitchen, Vance instructed carefully. Position them precisely over the marble island where Sylvia prepares all the evening beverages. We will monitor the live digital feed from a secure van parked down the street. I carefully grabbed the expensive equipment, slipping the tiny devices deep into the hidden zippered compartment of my designer leather purse.
I left the downtown law office just as the stormy sun began to violently break through the dark, heavy Massachusetts clouds. I drove back to the sprawling estate incredibly slowly, desperately trying to calm my racing mind. Richard and Sylvia would be aggressively waiting for my signature on those dangerous conservatorship documents. I absolutely had to play the part of the naive, exhausted daughter perfectly to survive the day.
When I finally walked through the heavy mahogany front doors, the massive house was eerily silent. Richard was sitting stiffly in the main living room, aggressively scrolling through his phone. Sylvia suddenly appeared from the gourmet kitchen, wiping her flawless hands on a pristine silk towel. She locked her icy eyes on me with that exact same careful, predatory smile. Did you finally find whatever you were looking for? Yes, I lied smoothly, forcing a very small, tired smile onto my face. I really just needed to clear my heavy head. I sat down exhaustedly on the expensive leather couch and let out a massive, dramatic sigh. I have been thinking deeply about those legal papers, I told them, staring directly at my father. I am going to sign them for you. But first, I really want us to do something incredibly special to honor Grandma today.
Richard looked visibly shocked, but quickly nodded his head in eager agreement. That is a very wonderful idea, Audrey. What exactly do you have in mind? Sylvia's deeply calculating eyes narrowed just a tiny fraction of an inch. I want to cook her absolute favorite extravagant meal, I suggested warmly. Let's all drive down to the massive downtown organic market together right now. We need to buy the freshest ingredients. Sylvia instantly hesitated, her perfect posture stiffening. That massive market is incredibly far away, darling. We could simply go to the local luxury grocer. I adamantly shook my head. No, Grandma Eleanor always said the downtown market was the absolute best. Please, let's just do it perfectly right for her. They exchanged a very quick, extremely nervous glance. Richard finally shrugged his shoulders. Fine, let's go.
We drove strictly to the massive organic market in downtown Boston, almost a full hour away from our sprawling estate. Sylvia sat rigidly in the luxury front passenger seat, constantly glaring back at me through the rearview mirror. I pretended to just look out the rainy window, but I was frantically texting Vance under my heavy wool coat. He only needed a 40-minute window to securely tap into the estate's complex router.
Once inside the brightly lit market, I intentionally took my sweet time. I walked incredibly slowly through the massive produce aisles, carefully picking up expensive bundles of fresh thyme and organic rosemary. These specific herbs smell so much better, I loudly announced, holding up a fragrant bundle. Sylvia audibly sighed with deep irritation, aggressively tapping her designer heel on the floor, but said absolutely nothing.
I stretched the agonizing grocery trip out for nearly 2 full hours. I relentlessly interrogated the incredibly confused teenage butcher about the absolute best organic free-range chicken for roasting.
Richard tried desperately to hurry me along the aisles, but I kept intentionally finding brand new luxury ingredients to deeply inspect. By the time we finally left the massive store, the freezing Massachusetts sky was pitch black. On the horribly quiet drive back to the estate, Sylvia was completely silent. She kept throwing me deeply suspicious glances in the dark. When we finally pulled into the sprawling circular driveway, I immediately ran upstairs to my vintage bedroom and locked the heavy wooden door. I carefully checked my encrypted phone. Vance's high-tech team had successfully connected the microscopic cameras hidden inside the dark kitchen.
The very next morning, I woke up with my heart pounding violently against my ribs. Today was the exact day I would perfectly execute the final trap. I walked slowly down the grand staircase and found Sylvia standing alone in the massive marble kitchen. She was elegantly brewing a fresh pot of expensive artisan coffee. Richard was outside the heavy glass doors, completely distracted by checking the freezing morning estate mail. I sat down heavily at the massive kitchen island and let out a dramatic, exhausted sigh. I am finally ready to officially sign the estate conservatorship papers today, Sylvia, I announced smoothly. But I really just need a strong cup of coffee first to clear my horrible headache. Sylvia's flawless, icy face immediately brightened with pure, unadulterated greed. Of course, Audrey, darling, let me pour you a special cup. She turned her elegant back to me, reaching up for a massive ceramic mug. I carefully kept my eyes locked onto her precise micro-movements, but I also glanced at the live camera feed secretly playing on my hidden phone under the thick marble counter. The incredibly sharp high-definition microscopic lens perfectly captured Sylvia swiftly pulling a tiny clear glass medical vial directly out of her expensive silk robe pocket. My breath completely caught in my terrified throat. Through the live digital feed, I watched in absolute horror as my evil stepmother quickly uncapped the tiny vial and tapped a small pile of untraceable, chalky white paralytic toxin directly into the steaming dark coffee. Her practiced, fluid movements were utterly terrifying. She had done this exact sinister routine to Grandma Eleanor every single night for several months. Sylvia elegantly turned back around, her signature fake smile firmly plastered across her absolutely flawless face. She gracefully slid the incredibly hot, poisoned ceramic mug directly across the massive marble island toward my shaking hands. "Drink up, darling," she purred softly, her icy eyes burning directly into my soul. "This special organic blend will absolutely help you deeply relax before you sign those legal papers." I did not reach for the steaming mug. I just sat perfectly still, staring deeply into her incredibly calculating, predatory eyes. The deafening silence inside the sprawling kitchen stretched out for several agonizing seconds. Richard suddenly walked back inside through the heavy patio doors, violently shivering from the freezing Boston wind. He immediately froze in his tracks when he deeply felt the heavy, suffocating tension. "Why aren't you drinking your special coffee, Audrey?" Sylvia aggressively demanded, her perfect smile finally cracking just a tiny fraction of an inch. I slowly stood up from the massive stool, my hands miraculously steady now despite the absolute pure adrenaline violently surging through my veins. Because I incredibly prefer my morning coffee without a heavy, lethal dose of an untraceable synthetic paralytic toxin. Sylvia's flawless face went completely, terrifyingly pale. Richard dropped the heavy stack of morning mail directly onto the pristine floor. "Audrey, what insane garbage are you talking about?" he desperately stammered. I aggressively slammed my encrypted phone directly onto the marble counter, loudly playing the crystal-clear high-definition surveillance footage of Sylvia poisoning my drink just 90 seconds earlier on a massive loop. "Grandma Eleanor knew absolutely everything before you brutally murdered her," I screamed, my voice echoing violently off the high kitchen ceiling. She left a highly detailed secret journal and immediately hired Vance's private investigation team. You two greedy monsters desperately wanted the massive estate and her multi-million-dollar life insurance payout, so you slowly poisoned her to death to fake a sudden heart failure. Sylvia instantly panicked, violently pointing her manicured finger directly at my pathetic, crying father. "It was entirely his master plan," she shrieked hysterically. "Richard aggressively forced me into doing it because he is drowning in massive corporate debt. He ruthlessly threatened my life." Richard aggressively shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "No, Sylvia, you brought the poison. You are entirely insane." Before they could violently attack each other, the heavy mahogany front doors of the estate were aggressively kicked open. Blinding red and blue emergency lights violently flashed through the tall windows. Heavily armed Boston police detectives furiously swarmed the massive kitchen, screaming loudly with their heavy weapons drawn. "Federal agents, show us your hands right now. Drop absolutely everything and get on the floor." Sylvia released a blood-curdling absolute scream of pure terror as heavy steel handcuffs were aggressively slapped onto her expensive wrists. She continued screaming completely psychotic accusations at Richard as the detectives violently dragged her out the massive front doors. My pathetic father did not fight back at all. He just sat heavily on the pristine kitchen floor, sobbing uncontrollably as they read him his strict rights. My younger brother, Julian, eventually rushed home from his expensive college campus, completely devastated. He had been kept completely in the dark, exactly as Grandma Eleanor had brilliantly designed to perfectly protect his pure innocence. The sprawling Massachusetts estate quickly filled with highly specialized forensic teams, bagging the lethal poison and meticulously securing Eleanor's locked safe for the federal prosecutors. 6 months later, the freezing federal courtroom in downtown Boston felt incredibly satisfying. The stern federal judge aggressively sentenced my greedy father to absolute life imprisonment without any possibility of parole. Sylvia received a slightly reduced federal sentence due to her frantic, desperate cooperation, but she will still completely rot away inside a maximum security prison cell for several miserable, long decades. Julian and I permanently kept the sprawling Boston estate, but we could not simply live inside a massive house completely haunted by such dark, terrifying memories. Instead, we heavily utilized the massive inheritance to brilliantly transform the luxurious property into a fully funded, highly secure sanctuary, specifically designed for desperate women aggressively escaping terrifying domestic violence and severe financial abuse. Grandma Eleanor always believed true wealth was meant to incredibly shelter innocent people, not just blindly hoard dark secrets. Pure, unadulterated greed can violently destroy an entire family, but the absolute truth always brilliantly finds a way out. Sometimes the ultimate, most devastating revenge is simply surviving the dark toxicity and successfully building a massive, beautiful empire entirely from the shattered pieces.